Good evening, friends. Welcome to Life Group. Tonight we are dealing with the very small, very easy to talk about concept of marriage. Of course, that's not the case. Tonight is going to be, I think, one of the more memorable nights that you're going to have in Life Group. And I'm trusting and praying that this becomes quite a landmark, the conversation that you're about to start having with the people around you who you trust. There is nothing more beautiful than a good marriage. And I say that not because I look around the world and see loads of beautiful marriages and I'm convinced about it from that. I say that because God designed marriage, and He says that when it's done the way He designed it to be done, it is unspeakably beautiful. It's two people who are broken and messed up, choosing to love each other with the love of Christ. It's two people choosing to minister unconditionally to each other, this amazing love of our Father, regardless of what they get back. And what you'll have heard us explain, that to look like quite practically, what that marriage looks like on Sunday. Terry and Charlene are living it, Bern and I are trying to figure out how to live it. What you'll have heard us speak about on Sunday is terrifying as much as it is beautiful. Because that unconditional love leaves you no safety net and no control mechanism to make sure you get what you need. And so this would set you up for difficult conversations even within your marriage couple by yourselves. I mean, to talk frankly and honestly about marriage just with your spouse is hard to do. To talk frankly and honestly about the state of your marriage with people around is doubly hard to do. And so you'll be tempted to shut up shop this evening and to set out a reasonably good set of family portraits. And when people are asking you how your marriage is, you just give them the glib stuff. Please don't do that. Please don't rob yourself of this conversation where you get to literally be a community of faith like we were speaking about a few weeks ago. You get to be that community that knows each other and understands each other, warts and all, and is able to speak truth and love and grace into your relationships and hold each other to account to move towards the kind of marriages God has called us to have. Because here's what's at stake. Firstly, as you'll remember from Ephesians 5, which we spoke through on Sunday and which we'll speak through now, we don't do this whole marriage thing out of reverence for each other. Well, my wife's so great, therefore I'm going to submit to her, or my husband's so great, therefore I'm going to submit to him. Remember, we submit to each other out of reverence for Christ. So what's at stake here really is our offering of thanks back to God for the unspeakable riches of His grace. The fact that He's forgiven us, the fact that He's given us purpose, the fact that He's redeemed us from the pit and brought us into His family, the fact that He no longer holds our sins against us, that we ought to owe God a whole lot, and yet He's given us a blank slate. The fact that for the rest of my life, I don't just get to look back on the fact that I've been forgiven, I get to look forward to the fact that I'm part of His eternal purposes and bringing His kingdom into this world. My life has meaning now. I look at this incredibly glorious, amazing God who's done all this for me, and I go, God, how can I thank You? How can I express my reverence for You? And He says, well, submit to your wife out of reverence for Me. And the wife looks up at the father and goes, God, You're so incredible, You're so awesome, You're so kind to me. How do I get to worship You properly? He says, well, submit to your husband then, out of reverence for Me. Oh, but they don't deserve it. Oh, but that's not worked so well in the past. Oh, I don't know if that makes me a little bit too vulnerable. God, are there any other options? No. So that's part of what's at stake here. You may go, well, it's just too painful to open these old wounds. It's just too much effort to try and create the beautiful marriage that God has called me to have. Well, then you're saying it's too much effort and it's too painful to try and worship God and revere God the way He absolutely deserves to be revered. So that's part of what's at stake. The other part of what's at stake is that God has used marriage to be a picture of how Jesus relates to the church. I mean, Jesus is our model for this whole thing, husbands. So what we're doing when we get our marriages right as Christians, when we start to base them on this idea that God has for them, is we get the rest of the world to start looking at something supernatural and incredible. And they're going to look at that and go, wow, that looks foreign, that looks alien. How can two people love each other that riskily, that vulnerably, that unconditionally? How on earth can that work? I want to know about their God. So that's the second thing that's at stake. And the third thing that's at stake, which we sometimes like not to think about, is the fact that our kids are going to look at the kinds of marriages we live and make a decision about whether they actually want that or not. Just like you think back to your parents' marriage and how much that's impacted and influenced the way you come into marriage, your kids are watching you, and you want to show them the kind of marriage that God has called you to. So with all of that at stake, and understanding that God has our best interests at heart, and He designed marriage and called us to this beautiful, incredible, scary thing, this evening you're going to start talking about how you move your marriage out of that contractual sort of I owe you, you owe me thing two selfish people warring against each other, or maybe it's got to the point where it's an absolute stalemate, where it's a cold war, where it's just easier to leave stuff swept under the rug, and you've just settled for a certain standard. There's a bunch of pain and a bunch of unmet needs. You're going to look at all of that stuff, which is horrible, and you're going to now, if you're brave, expose it to the rest of the group and say, guys, this is what I'm going through. This is where we're at. Help us. We want to start to live the way God has called us to live, because we expect that there'll be wonderful life that comes out of it. So know that I am praying for you. I trust that this is a great evening and that your relationships kick on to the next level. Over to your life group leader.